بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum. So, what I want to talk about today is if you're someone who studied linguistics, how do you go from linguistics to just using language, not on a micro level? And I think this is a very big topic. I think because you kind of don't know where to start and where to end because with linguistics it did seem kind of finite. Um, but when you kind of try to transition from linguistics to language, then the arena is endless. And I think for some of us who did study linguistics um, and stuff, it's kind of like you spend so much time with linguistics that you don't know when the right time is to like start talking about language and how, you know, in the end, you're going to use these bits and pieces in linguistics to, use it in your language and life and stuff. So the transition, I think, um, isn't very easy because you were with linguistics, you're actually studying bits and pieces of things. So it makes sense to study it mentally. And then with language, um, when you are reading about topics and now you're like paying attention to topics, now it's kind of like um, you don't know if you don't know if you can focus in the bits and pieces of language anymore because now the topics are much bigger, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like you don't want to go there because it's the analysis of topics is endless. So that kind of becomes a little too much. Like with linguistics, it really did feel like you're just working on like numbers or something that's just like, something that's, it's kind of like a homework thing that doesn't really require too much, let's say, emotional analysis. Yeah, that's the word I use. That's the right word. Um, it's very mechanical, so you don't really resort to emotions too much. And when you're studying language, on the other hand, um, you're now kind of delving into emotions and, learning about actual, you know, life things and things like that. Um, Also, it kind of like makes you question now, like where you want to work or where you can work because um, your work was kind of bits and pieces of language and stuff. And when you make that transition to language um, and you're working with someone on their linguistics. It's like you're going back and forth between these two things. And it's not very easy, I think, to go back and forth between these two things. Um, Also, I sometimes say like I just want like a casual job so that there isn't analysis happening all the time with regards to like linguistics and language and stuff. And that's where kind of like the working issue comes in, because you're like, do I want to just continue working with linguistics? Do I want to work with language which involves emotion? Or do I just want to get out of it and get a casual job where you're not doing this or that? You're just kind of doing some kind of job before figuring out whether you want to, um, you know, what you want to do with the language and all of that. Um, Essentially, it's it's not something you can enforce, I think, on someone, like whether they want to work on their linguistics or their language, you know. It's not something that you can enforce. It's not like if you graduate with this kind of stuff, um, you can't really say to someone, this is my work and you have to accept it, and I have to make money from this thing that I'm working. Um, there's like I think there's a really big divide between how things are set up in university universities in general, and what is really needed to be worked on in real life. And it's like the media doesn't help, if that makes sense. um, it doesn't help give you like a good picture of what you really need to, like what we really kind of need to work in or on. Um, so I think I just recently went through that, where um, you're like, why isn't the world the same as the academic environment? Or why is the academic environment not the same as the outer world? Or why is why are the days when you're not in a school setting not the same as like the days when you're not in a school setting? Are you taking this into that, or are you taking that into this? Um, so I think staying inside like the world of linguistics is kind of comfortable, because you don't think too much about a lot of things, right? Um, but then the difficulty with staying within like the world of linguistics is um, everyone has a different kind of like angle of it, and then you don't know what you don't know where you fit in a company or any setting. Um, and a lot of times you just kind of get into some kind of learning environment, right? Where there's raising going on. And that's the reality of it. The reality of it is that once you're done school, you're now expected to do some raising. And it's kind of hard in a way to look at it like that because, you maybe had some kind of dreams or, you know, imagination of what you would be doing with this background, right? And it really does seem like you get thrust into raising other people, right? And even if you say, well, I'm only here to improve this person's language, but they're like, uh, not really, you know? These are humans who you're taking their time and you're part of this time in their life. And so they need to eat and they need to, do these things. So the first time I think I worked with linguistics was in a nursery. And I was like, if raising people is the result anyway, like after you finish school, so why are there so many fancy kind of programs and things like that to choose from? Unless you're going to have to create the environment that is ideal for you to use the stuff that you learned. Um, so yeah, sometimes you don't know if you should create the environment that you want, like that is ideal for you to work in, or if you should accept that you were kind of taught things in bits and pieces in a university setting, and now you kind of need to cater to the environment and actually how a lot of humans don't really work hand in hand. Um, like the way people work, like in units and stuff. And then all the units don't really flow with each other the same way uh, it does inside the academic world. I think inside the academic world, because it's it's a they're making money basically, so it's a business, so they have to work together to make it work in order for them to make money and all of that. So when you start to see how things kind of work, you start to see how things kind of work, then you don't know what you need to do exactly at this point. Are you going to try to enforce the business model that you learned? Or are you going to question it or surrender to, I guess, the way the outer world works, where a lot of people have not learned things from an academic point of view, and that's fine. Like it's never been, to me, like going through academics and not going through academics is not, um that's not where classes are built for me. um it's not built for me that way, that you studied academically so you are naturally a higher class than someone who didn't go to school. I don't think that's what I understand of classes. Um, what I understand, what I my understanding of class is from a linguistics lens, because what we were taught was that the way you speak shows your uh, level of education. The way you speak, the way you pronounce things, and all of that, whatever you can maintain from that is how you know, how your class, I guess for linguists, that's how they look at your class and stuff. So yeah, it's an interesting, it's definitely an interesting kind of shift, um, going from linguistics to language. And I don't think I realized how much, like all this talk about how your childhood affects your life as you grow. Um, that's something I also, like, I was kind of aware of it throughout studying linguistics, but it I never actually looked into the details of childhood, and how you're raised and all of that as a holistic way. I think when I was teaching linguistics, I did not want to interfere with how the person is raised, right? Like, I did not want to get into that because that's not my place. Um, in a way, it does limit how you're involved in that person's raising, and language, but at the same time, I feel like a lot of people who are called linguists, they just, they're able to keep their ideas about raising to themselves and then just focus on, like, linguistics with other people, because your job is to raise their language and linguistics. Your job isn't to talk about how they're raised in general, like their, how they are taught things and how they are, um, all of that stuff, right? Like all of the rest of the things that are a part of raising people. Um, yes. So with money, it's also a big factor in all of this, because you, mm, it's not easy to quantify teaching linguistics and stuff. It's not easy to quantify it, So unless you're working under someone who did study linguistics, um, you wouldn't know how that is quantified. Like, is it your time? Is it by hour? Is it by their improvement in their language? Um, and I don't remember working under someone who studied linguistics or applied linguistics. Um, and so I was talking to someone last week, and he asked me, so do you feel like people don't understand your field? And I said, in general, yes, because it's not one of like the main um, like I think it is a known field, but it's not as known as studying, I don't know, engineering or medicine. It's kind of like a subsect of something else. I've worked with people, I've worked with engineers and um, I've worked with engineers and doctors before because they um, need to improve their language sometimes. Um, but because you're kind of like in a supportive kind of field, um, yeah, monetizing it is not very simple because it depends on how the person views what you're being paid for. Is it modeling language? Is it Are you modeling language, or are you making sure this person's language is improving? Yeah, you don't really know exactly what's going on um, in terms of monetizing this kind of job. So I'm gonna stop here. Um, I don't think this video is a, a simple, like, I haven't really started from the bottom talking about what linguistics is and all the stuff. I'm kind of just talking about where I am in my life with regards to um, making these transitions and figuring out what to do next. So these are the three things that came to my mind with regards to this stuff, right? Uh, I spoke to a professor last week or the week before um, in terms of what you could do with this next. And she said that you can um, get into audiology or get into speech pathology. And so I'd be going through a process of applying to colleges again and applying to, I think what makes sense would be like a communicative disorders assistant. I think that would be a doable thing for me next. I don't know if I can get into speech pathology or audiology yet, but maybe I'll apply, inshallah, and see how that goes. We'll see. Okay. Assalamu alaikum.